Thanks, John. It's difficult to see out of these lights here, but it's so fantastic to see so many people at the summit. We haven't had the summit since 2019, so it's been a long haul. And I think everybody's desperate to see each other in the flesh and not on screens anymore, so it's fantastic to see so many people turning out. The one delegate said to me the reason why he's here is he said it's better to cry with other people than to cry alone. And hopefully what we're going to give you messaging today is to forget about the crying, forget about surviving. I know we're all in survival mode, and let's get it back into thriving mode again. And that's really what the Vision 260 is all about. So I'm presenting Vision 260. It's the CGA board's vision for the next 10 years. But it's really must become a vision for the value chain. You know, John spoke about value chains, the minister spoke about value chains, and it's about everybody in the room. So I hope you all associate yourselves as part of the value chain, because you are. You're part of the citrus value chain, and every one of you in this room has got a role to play in Vision 260. And I say now to all of you that if any of you want me to come and address you or your staff or your board or your shareholders about Vision 260, contact me. That's my job. I've got to drive 260 for the next, well, I'm not going to be here for another 10 years. John just told you how long I've been here, probably too long. But anyway, for the rest of my tenure, that's what I'm going to be doing. So firstly, in terms of Vision 260, we're looking at what we can control. Bruce and the others have been into all the gory details of what we can't control, weather, global conflict, the pandemic, etc. So what we're looking at is what can we control, how are we going to make it happen. So what do we mean, firstly, before I go into what we mean by 260, underpinning the vision are the work that some of the CGA group companies do. This industry is built on research. In the 1970s, the leaders in this industry decided to do their own research and started what was then the Outspan Citrus Center. And that's continued till today, where the growers now invest 60+% of the levy, about 150 million rand a year into research. And that is the foundation of this industry, and it continues to be. So when I go into the projects, we don't specifically go into research. That is conducted and implemented by CRI, and it cuts across all the projects that we do. The other aspect is transformation, where we spend 20% of the levy on transformation every year. And once again, it's not a specific project, it is something that the Grower Development Company and the Citrus Academy do, and it cuts across everything that we do, and I will specifically mention it a bit. So the basis of Vision 260 is our long-term model. We've been running this long-term model now for probably 10 or 15 years, and it's been incredibly accurate. Almost every year, the volume of exports has been pretty spot on with the long-term model. It's a 20-year model, looking ahead at where we're going in the future. Its base is the tree census, and the latest tree census shows that for the first time ever, we actually haven't grown in hectares. So those of you who got hectares in the ground will probably be a bit relieved that we're not going to be growing further. But we're just below 100,000 hectares, and that's trees in the ground already planted. And then there are a number of assumptions which you can see on the board that we put into that model to give us the outcome in terms of what volumes are we going to be exporting every year for the next 20 years. It's important to state that the initial years are more accurate than the later years, and also that it's a marketing estimate. So it's not what we can produce, it's what we can market in the export markets. So if we look at the outcomes of that model, in 2022, we exported about 164 million cartons, just below 2.5 million tons. That's the red line. In the next 5 years, trees in the ground will take us up to 220 million cartons. And in the next 10 years, until 2032, it'll take us up to 260 million cartons. So that's not with any additional plantings, etc. That's pretty much what the trees will have available for export in in 10 years' time. So the board grappled with this and said, well, this could be a disaster. We're going to have, the logistics won't cope, the markets won't cope. But we turned that around and said, well, what if? What if we could make it happen? What a huge bonus for the value chain, for everybody in the value chain to move that volume of fruit, and for jobs, and foreign exchange earnings, and for the industry and our competitiveness. So hence the Vision 260, which is that we are aiming to export 260 million cartons by 2032, sustainably and profitably. If we look at each of the different categories, and you can drill down into the long-term model to go by area, by category, or whatever. Last year, we exported 31.8 million cartons of mandarins. In the next 5 years, and this is where the real growth is, that'll double in terms of mandarins and take you up to 66.5. And then there's slower growth for the following five years up to 2032 of another 90 million cartons. But as you can see, 85 million cartons of mandarins will be on the trees, unless people start taking the orchards out, in 10 years' time. If we move to oranges, we export about 81.6 million cartons. That's both Navel and Valencia types. In the next 5 years, we'll increase that by 14.8 million cartons, and then the 5 years after that by a further 19 million cartons, up to 115.4 million cartons. Lemons, also growth initially from 34.7 by 11.9, and then it flattens off after that and remains at about 46.6 million cartons until 2032. Grapefruit, the sort of poor cousin of this citrus sector, we had about 16.7 million cartons now, and there's no real growth for the next 10 years. There's not a lot of new plantings, etc. So we go up another about 1.5 million cartons. So in the next 5 years, we go up by 60 million cartons, and the 5 years after that by 40 million cartons. So about 12 million cartons a year for the next 5 years, and then 8 million cartons a year for the 5 years thereafter. So, as I said, the board sat around and said, okay, let's see what if we can achieve this. And we came up with 8 projects that we've now initiating. They're still works in progress, so we still need to write up the action plans and the timelines, etc. But these are the 8 projects that we, as the staff of the CGA group companies, have been tasked with achieving over the next 5 years. So the first project involves markets and market demand. Where is this fruit going to be marketed? Who's going to consume this fruit in the next 5 and 10 years? How are we going to get it from the pack house to the port? How will we store the fruit before shipping, the warehousing, cold stores, etc.? How will we get the fruit effectively and efficiently through the port and onto the vessels? How will we ship the fruit cost effectively and timeously, the whole shipping debate? And then there's some cross-cutting projects. So those first 5 projects are standalone, will have their own plans, etc. The next 3 are cross-cutting in that they are included in each of those projects. So the first is stakeholder alignment. So engaging with everybody in the value chain to make sure that they have things in place to make the 260 possible. And how do we communicate the plan? As we go through the plan, every year we'll update and see where we are. How do we communicate the challenges and the obstacles that we might have, the opportunities, how we're progressing, and any setbacks on the way through. And then really important around information, Ferdy mentioned it earlier, the importance of information and making informed decisions through having proper data, analyzing that data and seeing where we're going, and making better use of the data that we've got. I mentioned earlier that transformation is critical in this whole plan. And the master plan was mentioned earlier, and the master plan is all about inclusive growth. So when we're talking about going from 160 to 260 million cartons, we're also talking about inclusivity in that growth. And what we're grappling with now is what what does that inclusivity look like? In other words, in terms of black-owned cartons, how many of the 260 will be black-owned cartons by 2032? And our board and the CGA Grow Development Company board are engaged with that process, and we'll obviously engage with the NAMC and with the Department of Agriculture and others in setting those targets, because we must have those targets. If you don't have targets, then you won't get to the target. So we have to set the targets, and we have to see how we're going, and we have to make them realistic, but also look at being ambitious in those targets. So the first one project is around market demand. So in other words, in existing and new markets, what potential is there in terms of accessing those new markets? And then what activities need to take place? So the DG was here earlier, and we've had a lot of discussions around Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development and the Plant Health Division, and being more energetic and enthusiastic and agile in terms of the market access negotiations that fall into their responsibility. Then obviously food safety requirements, the whole food safety issue and the use of plant protection products, which is under threat. We export our fruit to some very discerning markets, and we need to make sure that we have the tools available that we can meet the phytosanitary requirements while at the same time not impacting on food safety and the MRLs. And then Act 36, which is the act that determines the certification of new chemicals, etc. We need that department to be also properly working properly so that we can utilize the plant protection products that are available. A lot of what I'm discussing now will be unpacked as we go further in the summit. So there's a lot of discussions around market access that you'll pick up in the next panel, etc. But then there's also market development, which since the deregulation and outspan not being an industry body any longer, we don't have industry market development programs. If you're going to sell 260 million cartons in 10 years' time, you're probably going to have to urge consumers to eat more South African citrus. And John Valentine will be discussing that in his discussion. And then a big issue around tariff imbalances. A lot of our competitors have hugely beneficial tariff agreements with countries, especially in Asia, and we're falling behind in that. And we need government to take this seriously. We've engaged with the past two ministers of trade and industry and competition, and we have problems trying to convince them that we are at a huge disadvantage and they need to help us in this field. So this is quite a busy slide, but I just wanted to show you the work that we did in 2019 and just show you that Vision 260 is not pie in the sky. It can happen. So in the average exports, and this is mandarins, the average export of mandarins, and this is in tons, between 2016 and 2018 was 165,000 tons. The long-term model showed us that in the next, from 2019 to 2024, we'd have to export another 255,000 tons. From 165 to plus 255. So Portia Magwaza, our research economist, and myself, we went and engaged with the Fresh Produce Exporters Forum. We engaged with others. We looked at all the data in terms of what are our competitors exporting into different markets. We looked at the consumption during Northern Hemisphere citrus season and our citrus season. And we said, where's the potential? Where can this 255, if we were Big Brother, where would we put this 255,000 tons? And so the third column there, you can see how we divided that up over all the markets. And that was a target for 2024. So in other words, 2 years' time. And most people said it was impossible. We would never be able to get up to 420,000 tons of mandarins by 2024. Well, have a look where we are in 2022. We're already at 410,000 tons from 165 average 2016 to 2018. So in some markets, we're already ahead of where we said we should be in 2024. For example, the EU, we're way ahead there. In Russia, we're ahead. Pretty much on target in China, and then also ahead in the UAE and the Middle East. So we're going to redo this exercise now in terms of Vision 260, see where we need to be in 2027, look at the markets, etc., do the same exercise with all the value chain stakeholders, and divvy it up and see where we need to get our fruit into, and then use that as a tool to engage with the Department of Agriculture, who have to do the negotiations for us, and open up these markets or get better conditions of entry into these markets. You can see the impact on jobs in the last two, or jobs and income in the last two columns. So in terms of income, if we achieve what the long-term model says we should achieve, then that'll add 3.4 billion rand to citrus earnings. And if we do it, we'll add another 8,500 jobs. This is all about volume. And there's one other aspect to this that's really important, and that is profitability and sustainability. Because as most in the citrus industry know, we exported a record volume last year, but we probably made a record loss last year. And that's not sustainable. So what we need to do is engage with the whole value chain to make sure that this volume increase is sustainable going forward. Right, so I'm just going to go through project number 2 very quickly. Mitchell Brooker is in charge of this project, the road and rail project. He's already doing some work, him and Hesty, on this. A number of things. Immediately, we cannot afford any criminality on the roads. If we have issues like the July unrest or these burning of trucks that the people seem to enjoy doing, then we can't move our fruit, and then we won't get the 260 done. So we have to engage with government, and they have to start enforcing law and order on the roads, apart from everywhere else, of course. And then obviously the rail that was damaged during the storms, etc. We need those rail lines to be operating efficiently. We need the private sector participation models to be concluded, and funding, capital funding into the rail sector particularly, and into the roads. And what Mitchell's doing in this project and the next two is he's looking at them in terms of corridors, him and Hesty. So they're looking at it in terms of the corridors. So they're looking at the north to Maputo, north to Durban. They're looking at the Eastern Cape through to Kucha, and then they're looking at the Western Cape through to Cape Town, and dividing, looking at each of those separately, and looking at how much fruit we'll have to move on the road and the rail to each of those ports from each of those production regions. Have we got the capacity? What has to be done in order to make sure that we can move that amount of fruit through to that port in the future? And then engage with Transnet, engage with the road department, engage with the Minister of Transport, new one, which might be easier, and make it happen. So that's project number 2. Project number 3 is cold stores and warehousing on the same basis, looking at how much cold stores and warehouse there is in each of these corridors, and making sure that it can take that volume. The ports, Portia, I think, is here. I'm really privileged to have Portia Darby with us, the Chief Executive of Transnet. And obviously we'll hear from her later in terms of the plans around making the ports function efficiently for a time-sensitive and perishable product like citrus. The shipping project, Thomas will be talking in detail about the shipping project later. Obviously, last year, if I speak to most growers, they'll tell me that the shipping rates killed them last year, and they destroyed value in this industry. And we cannot have that happen again. So although rates are coming down, we need structural change in that sector in order to make sure that it doesn't happen again. It's no use the rates coming down, we all sit back and leave it as it is, and then 5 or 10 years' time, we're back in the same position, and we're all looking at each other wondering what we can do. So the whole fruit industries have joined together, all the grower associations, and now the FPF as well, Fresh Produce Exporters Forum, and we are busy with this shipping project to find solutions for this industry so that we're not held to ransom like we were last year. And then stakeholder engagement cuts across all of them, engaging with everybody around the 260 plan. Most important stakeholder, I would say, is government. We need them on board. A lot of this can't be done without government helping us. And it was fantastic to see the minister here and spending time with us, and her message, I think, was on point. And that just gives you an idea of the stakeholder mapping that we're doing at the moment, and then looking at each of those different sectors to make sure that we have the capacity for the 260. So just for example, paper. engaging with SAPI, have you got enough paper for 260 million cartons in 10 years' time, or do you need to go and build a new factory? And likewise with all the other service providers and input providers to make sure that we've got the capacity in their business. And it's a massive opportunity for the value chain. I mean, if the value chain looks at this and sees these volumes coming, there are huge opportunities to grow businesses in the citrus industry going forward. And then communication. It's essential that we communicate this plan going forward, as I said earlier, and communicate the ups and downs of it. We do have a CGA app now that growers can access information. We want to put information very quickly into their hands, and there's a banner outside where you can go and download the app if you're a grower. At the moment, we're just restricting it to growers, but we will look at trying to extend that to the value chain as we go forward. And then we obviously look at print, broadcast, and online media as well to get the messaging out there through our media company. And then information and intelligence. This has to be driven by research, and it has to be driven by informed decision making. And so within CGA, we've employed a data analyst now, Precious, and she's looking at all our data sets, etc., and trying to make sure that we get data out timelessly, accurately to the industry, and then also looking at all the data sets that we have out there and seeing how we can mine those to actually maybe do a bit of analytics and stuff, looking ahead, and not just reporting historically on what's happened behind us. So to finish off, and I've got 3 minutes left, so I've caught up some of the time for you, John. We can make Vision 260 work, but it's going to require everybody to understand what they need to do in order to make it work, and we're going to all work together. And please share with me your concerns, your challenges, etc., and let's find a collective solution to make this industry thrive and get to the 260 million cartons by 2032. Thank you.